welcome everybody to our next edition of Founders Talk. Today, we have the great Nadine Mentor with us. And Nadine's been a friend of mine for quite some time. Her story, her journey is really, really amazing. And the work that she's doing now is very, very exciting around investing in women and minorities. So Nadine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I know a little bit about you. Actually, I just learned a lot more about you, but give people an understanding of who you are, like what you do, the things you care about. Tie a nice little bow around that for us.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And I am less on titles and more on impact. So I like to say that I try to be a transformer. I try to help transform ideas into reality. I try to help be a catalyst for movement of change and to be impact focused in what I'm doing. And so that's the description that I like. And one of the things that I'm focused on is just really aligning my purpose, my passion, and my profession. And just to give a little bit of background, I started with the SEC, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, working in compliance, working with banks and helping them to better understand the rules and regulations of the federal government. And I actually started working with the SEC when I was 19. I graduated from college at 19, trying to make myself look older.
I did not know that. Like, you're like a regular Doogie Howser. I might have dated myself.
No. So I remember when I was 19, I was trying to make myself look older when I was going into the CFO's office, so they won't think like, who is this little teenager coming in here? But it was definitely an eye-opening experience just to be in that environment where, millions and billions of dollars are being moved, from the JPs, the Citigroups of the world. And that was really my first exposure to the corporate world. From there, I actually earned my MPA from Columbia University. I focused on my master's in public administration and economic financial analysis. So after that, I was recruited to work at UBS. I worked at UBS, Citibank, and Ramirez as an investment banker focused on infrastructure development, utilizing bond transactions. So I did that for 17 years, was really focused on the policy side, but a lot of the structuring side with regards to understanding the financing and the access to bonds for both the retail investors and institutional investors. And then after that, I kind of had an eye-opening experience about 7-8 years ago, actually around when the first financial crisis happened, around 2008, 2009. It was a real jolt to our industry, to say the least. And I really took time off to really evaluate, what do I want to do going forward? What type of role do I want to play in this? And that's when I left big bank. I left UBS Citibank and I went over to a small municipal bond shop called Ramirez and Company based out of New York. And I ran their Southeast division for 9 years until I realized that this is not what I want to do long term. Again, I want to be more impactful. I want to be a catalyst. I want to help transform people's lives and communities. And that's when I started Mentor Holdings. So Mentor Holdings' focus is to be a source of financial resource, as well as an educational and economic advisor to help invest in minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And I try not to actually say minority. I like to say diverse, because minority by definition sounds like it's less than. So I try to invest in diverse-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, really sector agnostic, but focus more so on the industries that are really catalysts for movement. So when we talk about supply chain logistics, when we talk about financings, when we talk about real estate, when we talk about infrastructure development, those are the industries that you're seeing the impact, where you can have more diversity to come in so that there's a greater impact on communities that matter to us. Yeah. And so that's Mentor Holdings. And then on my nonprofit side, I wear my nonprofit hat. I have a nonprofit called the Greatest Investment Girls Empowerment Program that is focused on creating and developing the future leaders that we need in order to lead organizations, in order to lead businesses, and lead our government in a strong. And so over the last 10 years, we've been able to mentor and help develop over 300 young ladies to have a greater impact, not only in Central Florida, but what was great about this last summer, because of, Zoom platforms, we had young ladies from South Africa that was part of our summer camp. So it was great for them to be able to connect with the young ladies in Orlando and to make those connections. So that was great.
Yeah, that's really cool. What's interesting is that I've somewhat have been on this journey with you. Like, I remember when you left the corporate side of banking, the big piece, and you went over to Ramirez, and I always felt like you were trying, like, I didn't know, because it probably wasn't as apparent to me, but you were looking for more meaning in the work that you were doing.
Definitely.
And I saw you move into the greatest, how do you say it again?
The greatest investment, TGI.
Okay, the greatest investment. I always get like the Whitney Houston tune starts playing in my head. The greatest love of all. When I hear that,
I do love that song. I do love that song.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So, and I remember when you made that transition, and then to hear what you're doing now, it's definitely feels like a merging of both some kind of like an eternal passion with your gifts and talents and skill sets that you've built up over the years. So I want to talk about how, like, when you were 19, 18-year-old Nadine mentor, like, what was it? What was the initial interest? Did you just like finance and like numbers? Because I want to figure out what ultimately led you to care to bring finance in line with like women's issue. Like, what was it about your story that made women issues important to you?
That's a great question, Kyle. I actually grew up with a single mom, 4 kids. She raised 4 kids by herself, and my family's from Haiti, and so we're of Haitian descent, and we have strong women in our family. And I just saw how my mom made it work. Whether she had to work 2 jobs or 3 jobs, she made it work. But I was thinking, how can I make it easier for the people like my mom going forward? And actually, I was focused on doing more policy work when I was an undergrad. When I was an undergrad, at first I thought I was going to be a pediatrician, but I realized I don't like needles, I don't like to see blood, I don't like to see sick people. So I was like, I don't think this is for me. And then I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and then I interned at a law firm, and I was just reading research documents all day, and I was like, this is not for me. And actually, one of my professors said, you should really look into the corporate world, because you're really good with numbers, and they need to see people like you in that setting. And so he was the first person to really introduce me to that. And I always thought, I don't want to go into the corporate world. I don't want to sell out. They're the greed, the evil. And he's like, we need to penetrate that world so we can better understand it and change it from within. So that was really the biggest exposure to me going into the corporate world, because I've always been involved in development. I've always volunteered. I've always done a lot of volunteer work in high school and college. But really on the finance side, he was one of the people that really taught me about the importance of money and the importance of wealth and education to transform some of the policies that I was really focused on, especially with regards to access to funding and access to education.
But you said that like, today it's about helping women get access. And so there was something that you saw throughout your journey that said, like, look, like, women aren't getting the access or whatever. Like, so what was the thing? Like, can you describe a few incidents or situations, scenarios or things that happened where this became very clear to you, and you said to yourself, oh, I can help solve this problem, right? Or I can become helpful in solving this problem for these women. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. And it's a few things. One, definitely my mom, because she was a homeowner, after having 4 kids, it's hard to be a homeowner on a a minimum wage salary, but she was able to save money. But I just remember when I was 12, when she purchased her home, how hard it was for her to get funding, how hard it was for her to go to the bank. And my mom is first generation from Haiti. And I just remember I was reading documents to translate it to my mom so she can understand that, and saying, how is it that she can work so hard and it's so hard for her to still be able to become a homeowner in this world that, you know, is supposed to be access for everyone. So that was the first thing. But then when I became in my professional role, I looked around, and to be honest with you, within investment banking, there's not that many women that look like me. And so when I looked around and I saw, you know, who are my mentors in this industry? Who are people that I can aspire to be like? There were not that many people who looked like me. So one of the first things that I did was try to really recruit to get more women and more women of color to look at investment banking as an industry to pursue for their career. And quite frankly, one of the reasons why is that they didn't grow up knowing investment banking. I didn't grow up knowing investment banking.
Right.
You know, you grow up saying you're either going to be a lawyer or a doctor. You know, those were the two choices like
Right.
that were considered to be successful in my family's eyes. And so they didn't know investment banking. They're like, oh, you're going to be work at the bank, you know, the neighborhood bank. Our neighborhood bank at that time was Barnett Bank. For some of you guys who remember Barnett Bank. And so you're going to work at Barnett Bank. So again, it's allowing that opportunity for exposure and education so that we can see more and see ourselves in those positions where normally we wouldn't be able to see ourselves in.
Yeah.
So I think that that is something to, you know, really think about.
I like a couple of things stuck out to me there. I don't know if you, Nadine, think of yourself as an entrepreneur, but I like that you go into the corporate space with a mission where it's like, I hadn't thought about going there because I was going to be a doctor or a lawyer, which are can be very cause-based, noble motivations. But the guy gave you a noble motivation for going into the corporate world, and that was enough. And then the next thing that's interesting to me is that when you get there and see that you are a scarce resource in the investment banking world, rather than necessarily only capitalize on that and go, oh, I'm the only one here that looks like me, I'm super valuable. Your next step is, how do I get more people that look like me here? And I think both of those things are what we see in successful social entrepreneurs. There's a reluctance, or they need a mission to be on. Social entrepreneurs need to be on a mission. That's what motivates them. That's what gets them started. And then there's this interesting, I don't want to say optimism because that makes it seem kind of shallow, but there's a confidence that says, I can affect large problems. So there's something in you, Nadine, that says there are not enough women of color here in this space. I'm going to change that. And I love that. I think that is at the core of problem solving, that we need that in every problem that we face as a country, as a world. So it's fun to hear that story. I think you have a social entrepreneur in you, which makes me.
I do. I definitely appreciate that. And that has been my transition from the corporate world and saying, how can I make a greater impact without the restrictions, perhaps, of being in the corporate world or being in a corporate environment with limitations.
Yeah.
Certain limitations.
Nadine, that's really cool. That I'm glad to hear you acknowledge, or at least lean into the fact that you are a social entrepreneur. With that being said, there's a side of social entrepreneur in terms of like it's not only obviously creating a business that's sustainable from a revenue and P&L standpoint, but there's also an obligation to social entrepreneur to measure the impact that they're having on the world. And so there's this tool that we use called the theory of change. And one of the pieces is what we call desired state or future state. It's like, what does the world look like and where is it now? And it's in between is where you do the work. And so my question to you is that like, what do you feel like the world is missing because women are under resourced or have limited access? Like, can you talk about your thoughts on that?
Definitely, definitely. And I will talk about it from both domestic and global. One of the things, I was invited to Africa last year on a delegation trip, which was March of last year, to South Africa and Kenya to look at opportunities for institutional investors, pension plans, foundations, endowments to move millions of dollars into Africa in a way that is impact investing, but with a return as well. So it's not just donation based, that's it, have fun, but it's an investment mechanism for accountability. So it's partially funded by USAID, USAID, and it was an incredible experience that helped me to see that, one, we talk about not having access to resources for women, especially in Africa. You're missing half the population then. You know, when you say not having access to women, half the population are not involved in the solution because you're taking them off the table. You're not allowing them a seat at the table. One is getting access. Two is the educational part of it. How do you educate them to realize their power, their worth, their impact, and teaching them about the financial side of it, teaching them about the business management side of it, and helping to walk alongside them to see long-term development and long-term growth. I think sometimes we can be short-sighted. So if we don't see the impact in 6 months or a year, we're like, okay, that's it. It didn't work out. Let's go on to the next one. It takes time. It takes time. And so that's why with the African Women Impact Fund, we're working with the United Nations Economic Development Authority. And we're really focused on how do we build this fund over 10 years so that we can have the greatest reach throughout Africa. And so we are getting sponsorships from different foundations, endowments, and governments to allocate $100 million per year to, one, increase the number of women fund managers, because ultimately they're the private equity managers that are investing in the entrepreneurs within Africa, and then increase the number of women entrepreneurs, women managers, and women owners of different projects throughout Africa. And so that's one of the biggest part, is the education, is the support, and the support on multiple levels. So on the government level, the support on the NGO level, but also the support on the local business level. So we're actually partnering with banks, because it can't just happen through the government. It can't just happen through NGOs. Banks have to see the value in it for them, because ultimately that's the source of funding that most of these women are going to go through. And so we are trying to work collectively in order to help train, create this incubation system, and help mentor. I believe in the power of mentors, and so to help mentor them for the next 10 years. Yeah. So that's globally one of the biggest things that I'm passionate about locally or domestically. Is not only investing in women-owned businesses and diverse businesses, but making sure the boards of a lot of these corporations are reflective of, or a reflection of, the diversity of our country. And so I actually was speaking on a panel last week that was focused on having more women, having more people of diverse backgrounds on corporate boards, on private boards, nonprofit boards, because again, we have to have that leadership at all levels. So it can't just be, okay, yes, our employee base, but the policies, the agenda, the structure is set at the corporate level and implement the C-suite level. So we have to see that diversity in all levels. And so when Ben was talking about just be happy with being the only one, from too often, you know, people are like, okay, we have one woman on this board, we have one diverse person on, well, we have two people. Well, that's not, you know, that's not what you should do. That's the, and so we want you to think larger picture. And so we've been working with a couple of foundations based out of New York to help educate, increase, especially in this time where we are in our world with social justice and looking at more equality and equity for everyone, try to increase the number of people in leadership that is reflection of this great rally cohort that you have right here in front of us.
I appreciate that.
I love that. What does the world look like when you're, and it's like, we don't know, we're missing half the ideas, we're missing half the solutions, we're missing half the perspectives. and that has to be true at all levels, whether it's the entrepreneur or the board level. One of the things I was hoping to learn from you a little bit is, as we work with early stage social entrepreneurs, sometimes there's the notion that everybody needs investment and that the goal is investment. And I think sometimes chasing investors undercuts the growth or the pace that the entrepreneur can move at. Can you talk a little bit about what companies you feel like need investment, and what you look for in a company that's ready for investment versus one that maybe should just focus on customer acquisition?
Definitely, definitely. And that's a great question. I actually, when I was in South Africa, I spoke at a private equity conference in February. That was my last international trip before COVID happened. And I usually travel a lot. Like last year, I was in 20 countries. And this year, I went to one country. So it was done. That was it.
Canada.
I know. That was it. But one of the conversations was around that. Like, not everyone needs investments right now. Sometimes what you need is just, again, customer acquisition. You need a stronger structure. You might just need an advisor, a business advisor, to help you better understand your vision and better structure your vision. Sometimes you may need a coach who's more of helping you in your delivery. People have a great idea, but they don't know how to deliver that idea, present it in a way that's relatable and that the other side can see the impact. And so, again, I don't know where everyone is with regards to your journey, but the first step is to really understand what you're doing and understand why it should be important to someone else. Why should someone else hear what you're doing and want to invest time to learning more? Because that's the first step, is really wanting to invest time to learning more about what you're doing before any money is discussed, before you talk about, how much money you're looking for, the end of what you're doing. Why are you doing it? Why should it matter to others? Right? And especially as a social entrepreneur, we're seeing this more and more, especially with the foundations, the endowments, the family offices. We work with a lot of large foundations to access funding, and they want to see the measurable outcomes. They want to see, so if you've done this on a micro scale, tell me how many people have been impacted by your organization. Tell me how are you going to help more people with regards to being a catalyst for whatever your objective is for your respective organization, and really having a plan in place. Because a lot of times people come to me and they have this great idea, and I'm like, that's a great idea. How are you going to implement this idea? What are the resources? How are you going to connect it with other people, other organizations? And not making sure, but is there another organization that's doing what you're doing? And is there opportunities to become even more impactful if you scale together? Because a lot of times we're looking at, we've invested in 2 other organizations doing something similar. So why should we invest in you when we're looking to diversify also the impact in the industries that we're working on? Mm-hmm. So you want to show why your strength, but you also want to show your understanding of the industry and the outlook for the industry. Where's that industry going? And of course, I'm a finance person. My background is in finance. I want to make sure the numbers work. And ultimately, I've passed on quite a few things because the numbers didn't work. And so there's one thing, to make a donation. I believe in what you're doing. I'm going to make a donation. But if you're saying that this is a social investment, part of what we're looking at is saying maybe on a typical private equity investment, I would expect 15 to 20%. But if it's a social impact investment, maybe I'll take 5 to 7% because I understand the vision of what you're doing. And it's not only the financial return, but it is the community impact. It is the, number of people that are going to be employed, the number of kids that's going to be educated, the number of families that will now have access to electricity, the number of communities that now have the safe roads and walkways. So those are numbers that we quantify when we look at the entire investment portfolio investments.
That's really interesting. So So one of the things, so all of our entrepreneurs are very early, are what we consider early stage. Some of them are a little bit down the road, but we're traditionally early stage, and the way that what we do is we center them around really two documents that we use, or two tools we use. One is called a social business canvas, which is like a lean business model canvas, with saying, hey, what is your problem, what's the solution, who's your customer, what are the channels you're going through. But the social lean canvas, the thing that's interesting about it is that it starts with mission and impact, and that those things should come together. And so our entrepreneurs really focus on putting those things together. And then the other piece is the theory of change, which I spoke about, and it's understanding what's the impact of this organization. As it scales, it should have an impact on the overall social problem that you are involved in. So it's very interesting to see how important both those documents are in terms of making sure that the organization is sustainable, but then also that you have a plan or a theory that's backed by science and research and has a plan attached to it on what is the change that you expect to see. And it's very interesting, like I said, to see your analysis on how you both include, like, okay, what's the return on investment in terms of the dollars, and then also like just a revenue, and then also on the impact side, right? Like there's also a second component to that. So 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 obviously the world is missing something. We don't have more female entrepreneurs and more women at the table, and also women of color at the table. Um, and and we so I guess so my question is like, what are some of, you can't obviously apply the traditional investment model to, because you said there's a lack of education, and so there's and so like, maybe are you seeing that women who traditionally come to you are not ready for investment because they, like, there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled in terms of education? And if so, then is that the reason why you have, because you say you have an accelerator, wait, did you say you have an accelerator or
So in Africa, we have an incubation
an
program.
incubation? Okay,
Yes. So
gotcha.
that's within Africa. Here I have a wealth education series to
Okay,
help educate about different aspects of wealth building. And that's just for anyone. That's not just for entrepreneurs. Again, it's just to understand and put wealth building as a part of the foundation of our family units. And we don't talk about that from a young age in terms of, teaching kids how to budget, save, and invest from a young age. That should be a part of our education curriculum, and it's not,
okay,
unfortunately.
gotcha. So it's not, so when these women come to you for investment, it's not, you're not qualified because your numbers aren't right, but you have a more holistic approach where you say, okay, well, here's a reason why you're not in a position to receive investment, but we have these other services that will help you get prepared. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And I'm
Oh,
big on partnerships. I don't claim to know everything. I don't claim to do everything. And so a lot of times women entrepreneurs will come to me and say, this is my business. And, I usually want to see at least 6 months to a year of you operating. And I need to see some kind of financials. Again, it's not pie in the sky. And so when we dig deeper, we're seeing several areas of gaps in a lot of places. So I will, you need to get your accounting numbers in order. So I will direct them to an accountant, or you need to make sure that your operations, your supply chain is not really, you're losing a lot of inventory. You have a huge inventory loss because you're not managing that well. And so I will connect them with different advisors that we have to help them in regards to access, operations, legal side. So a lot of times, again, you come in with an idea. I've been kind of doing this, pulling it together by my shoestrings, trying to make it work, but really trying to create a formal structure out of an informal experience that they've had. So
gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So can you walk us through, you talked a little bit about the criteria that you kind of apply when evaluating these opportunities. Can you talk to us about what are some of the like, if you picked out 3 or 4 nuggets, and I want you to talk in depth about each one, but what would be like the 2 or 3 nuggets of wisdom that you would say that are excellent for, let's just say, let's dedicate the first 2 to women, and then we'll dedicate the last one, we'll just say that's gender neutral, right?
Mhm.
So the men don't get left out. So
No, and I'm all inclusive. Listen, we need men
right.
for women to succeed too. So we got to
Right,
work together. We got to work together.
But men have been succeeding, and as you made the argument that 50%, that the world is over 50% women, and we cannot leave women out off. You know, we cannot afford to not have women at the table and involved in solution creating process. So the first 2, like, what's the nuggets? What's the first nugget of wisdom that you would give to a woman who is an entrepreneur in her journey? Like, what would that be? And talk at depth about that.
So I'm going to tell you an experience that happened. And so we had 3 entrepreneurs come in, 2 men and a female. And the men were so confident, they were, just for this experience, they were wrong about like 70% of what they said, but they were so confident in how they said it, and that it was like, wow. But when we went back, it was like, well, this is not right. This is not right. And although in this one particular case, the one female entrepreneur was correct, but she was so meek in terms of her delivery, in terms of her presentation, that it was hard to see her as a leader. And so my first thing would be to see yourself as a leader and go for it. Be confident in who you are, be confident in what you bring to the table, because unfortunately many times we are, and I see this and I've experienced this myself, and I think it's been good for me in a way to be raised in a very male-dominated investment banking environment where I had to learn to speak up. I had to learn to be clear that my voice was heard, because be confident in being a leader. So to exercise your leadership skills, don't be afraid of speaking up. Don't be afraid of, be sure about what you're saying and say it with confidence. Because again, when you're meeting people, when I'm going through the due diligence process, I'm getting a feel for you as a person as much as I'm getting a feel for your company and what your company provides. And so if I feel like, well, she's not really, speaking up or standing up for herself, how is she going to stand up for her company? How is she going to stand up for her people, her team that she's going to be managing? And so I will say this, it's just, again, this is for everyone, not only for women, but be confident in the leadership skills that you bring to the table. Be confident in your expertise, your experience, and know that you are value added. And so again, when you're meeting someone, you want to be sure and you want to be clear about what you're delivering, because those nonverbal cues, it comes across very strong. And so I'm like, okay, she doesn't feel too sure, so why would I feel sure in her? So you have to look at from an investor perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting you said that, because like when you look at just Silicon Valley, for example, and how a lot of those investments go to men, and I always think to myself, like, why did they invest in this? Like this product is clearly, but it's something about one of the evaluation points is what you talked about, is like the men in these conversations, they're so confident because of whether it's false bravado or not. They're so confident in it that there's something that matters in the decision of the investor to invest in their organization, and it matters more than some may believe, right? Like I mean, you can have a product that's great, but then somebody could come in with a product that's a little less but more bravado, and somehow that captures people.
And it's so true. It's really relationship. Everything that we do is relationship based. At the end of the day, as a banker, most of the products and services that I offer, other banks offer the same thing. So they want to ultimately work with you. They feel a connection with you more than someone else, with regards to why should they choose you versus someone else. So it's really focus on building that relationship. Focus on getting to know why someone wants to be affiliated with your organization. Relationship building, people underestimate the power of relationships.
So is that your second nugget?
That's my second nugget. So my first nugget is exercise and share and be strong in your leadership.
Leadership, right?
And my second nugget is definitely develop relationships. Be intentional about developing a relationship where you're able to show your authentic self. I don't, just because I may like books about, I don't know, books about massages. I love massages. I can't get massages right now. And don't be like, oh my gosh, I love to read books about massages too, when you don't. So,
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
so be authentic in your relationship building. Be true to who you are. Share who you are, because when you are not authentic, it will come out. It will come out. It will feel like a false and a forced relationship. So be authentic with your relationship building, but be intentional about building relationships. The follow-up is so important. You meet so many different people, and you can't say, and too many times I've heard this, well, I don't want to impose, I don't want to follow up. That's the only way you're going to build a relationship, is if you follow up just one time and you're expecting the other person to follow up. That you need something from them more than they need from you. So you have to go and be assertive about going after that relationship, and learning more. And if you have information, this is the other thing. This is my third nugget.
The third nugget.
Share information that you have. So maybe you wrote a document about the impact of special needs on kids, a research paper. Share that. People want to see you and what you add to your industry in different light, not only related to your specific organization, but what else are you doing to help the industry as a whole? And so I'm actually working with quite a few private equity firms right now to help them gain access into Africa. And they're saying, well, how do I talk to these institutional investors? How do I talk to these endowments? And I said, have you written anything about the impact of COVID? Have you written anything about health, about children? Whatever you're doing, share it, because they won't know otherwise. They're not looking for it. So you have to share what you're doing with them. And again, some people may connect with it, some people may not, but that's you really marketing yourself, getting your organization's name out there, and getting your name out there. So, and sometimes that's free stuff. Sometimes you have to speak on free panels, or just be an advisor or opinion, do an op-ed or something, but you have to get your name out there if you want people to know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, what stage are in your holding, mentors holding, and investment group? What stage entrepreneur are you specifically looking for in that?
So we normally don't do early stage. So I'm actually curious to see what stages you are all at. And I know you said some are fairly early. We tend to do more, at least Series A, at least, but more, at least having at least 2 to 3 years of financials, because we want to see, one of the things that I'm focused on is creating scalability for your organization. And so, again, you have shown that you've been able to lead it on a smaller scale. How can we grow it to help you have a greater impact with what you're doing?
Yeah, for our entrepreneurs, they're a lot of them have an idea or some existing work, and what they're trying to get to is to really identify the product market fit, meaning where they have a clear customer with a clear need, and the product aligns to them, and the value resonates with them, and you can see that all now you need is some gasoline, because you found it, to get that customer, that you can prove that you can go out and find more of those customers and get them to click the button to pay. And so a lot of them are there. And I think for those on the call, that's why this work is important, because you'll never get to where Nadine is unless you find the product market fit. Like because some of our entrepreneurs will maybe have 4 or 5 customers, but then they all like look different, and so but the scalability is when you're able to find that who that customer is and align that product, which shows that you have product market fit, and then you come to Nadine, you say, look, I've seen success on the same type of customer using the same type of process, using this exact same product that they're buying into. I need some gas, some fuel to make this thing go, right? And she's like,
Make
of
it go,
course.
to make it grow.
Yeah,
Yes.
make it grow. And so it's like, of course, let me write you a check.
It's not always that easy. Kyle just made it real easy. He's like, of course, let me stroke the pen.
I like
so
what you said too, Nadine, because I have found that to be true, that whether you're looking for a strategic partnership or timely investment, like assuming that you have a machine that works, that you can identify a customer, a pain point, and sell them something, that doesn't necessarily get you the strategic partnership or investment. The next step is like they recognize that that at least 8/10 of the success of a business is the entrepreneur that's leading that business. And then it's way easier for people to do work with people that they like than people that they'll put up with. There's enough good ideas and businesses starting that if they find a comrade in the work, they're much more likely to do it. And so in my experience, strategic partnerships come from folks who find places of alignment. And if you're approaching someone who might be a strategic partner, and all of you are in that place right now, to surface a place where you guys are aligned and build commonality on that. I learned I could make friends with my father-in-law when I talked about college football. There wasn't many other places, right? College football and public education. We could talk about those two things, right? But like that's the same. In strategic partnerships, I had to learn the things that we could talk about. I had to care about community health, or so it's important, I think, for you all right now to be doing that work as you're looking at strategic partners, so that they know they're more than a paycheck to you. They're a partner in the mission.
That's a
So I'm glad
great,
you brought that out, Nadine.
no, that's great, Ben. I was actually on a call yesterday with a foundation, and one of the things that he said is, what else can I do other than, in addition to writing a check?
Mm-hmm.
What else can I do? How else can I provide value in addition to writing a check, especially within the industry that you are all looking at, social impact investing? They're just not looking at checks. They're looking at, how can I get involved? Can I be a part of your advisory board? Can I, help connect you with people within my organization who may know other people? So that's the great thing about people who are in this sector, because they are very mission-based and social impact based. So it's not just writing a check. And someone told me when I was starting my business, and he said, ultimately I want to work with someone who at 9, 10 o'clock at night, when we're working on a proposal, when we're working on a new business idea, that I actually want to work with them. And I don't mind being on the phone with them for 2-3 hours at midnight, versus someone who's, has a horrible attitude. They can smart, but like, do I really want to spend 3 hours on the phone with them trying to plan out this business idea?
Yeah. That's
Totally.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Before we open up the Q&A, I just want to ask a quick question. What's been the hardest part in your journey into like entrepreneurship? Because it looks like you started Nadine or Mentors holding an investment back in March of early 2019. What's been the hardest thing for you, or the challenge for you?
And this is, I actually started doing more investing while I was still working full time. And, a lot of times we do that. We start our side hustle before we create our full-time job, our full-time position, because again, making sure that you are building that platform and that foundation as you transition out of one industry into the next, so one career path into the next. I think the challenge times is, for me, helping people to see me in a different role. So they saw me as corporate investment banking Nadine, and moving that into entrepreneurial, private equity, social impact, impact investing Nadine. And so for me, before I was really focused on domestic. So government bonds, US bonds, infrastructure development, and making sure that I invest the time to learn more about what are the needs in emerging markets as I created a portfolio around emerging markets. And so really planning and spending the time to invest in Africa. Last year, I went to 12 countries in Africa. I probably spent 40% of the year in Africa. I loved it. It was amazing. But it was that time investment so that you can get the information, the education, the resources, the relationship, everything that I was telling you guys, to make sure that I did that as I created more of a international portfolio as part of what I'm doing overall. So it was great. I'm glad it was last year, because clearly I wouldn't be able to go anywhere.
I really like that too, because I don't know if I get focused on the task or the job, and I forget to pay attention to how people perceive me. But especially as you're going out to make initial sales or recruitment calls, all of you on the call, this is really important. And knowing that people will form opinions about you based on where you come from, how you look, how you carry yourself, all of that is important, especially as you're making initial sales. So I hear Nadine, you saying, as you went to begin to raise this fund, you had to be aware of how people were viewing you and build credibility in this next space in order to get customers or fund investors. Definitely. And all of you on the call, that's going to be significant. Understanding your barriers between you and your customers that you'll never bring up and they won't bring up, but are the subtext of all the conversation. Somehow you got to surface that stuff and begin to deal with it before you even show up.
And it's really important. I'm sorry, Kyle. I was going to say, I don't know what everyone's backgrounds are, but they knew me as Nadine, managing director at Citibank. And so there was a little bit of security because it's Citibank, nothing's going to happen to Citibank. And so I said, okay, I'm the same Nadine, the same expertise, the same experience, and I'm just Nadine under Mentor Holdings. And so changing that mindset from a large bank, or Ramirez and Company or whatever that's been around for 50 years, and saying, I'm willing to invest in you as an entrepreneur versus looking at you as an employee of a corporation. So that's really important to look at.
Yeah. I think also something key that you said earlier was about how establishing to do other things, establishing your thought leadership. So I remember very specifically saying that if I'm going to have an impact in the education space, that I not only had to create a product, but I had to establish my thought leadership, and so just broadly, and so that's why it became important to me to be a part of certain boards, to speak at events, and to do things to establish who I was. And by doing that, it's so interesting how it brought me to the table, to new tables. And so I want to encourage our entrepreneurs on the phone. Like, I know that, on this call, that I know that you are in the process of trying to build your business, but do look for opportunities. Nadine was saying that you can establish your thought leadership around fashion, ethical design, nonprofit giving, composting, or environmental sustainability through composting of food waste, through autism, right? Human trafficking. Like, look for those opportunities to be able to speak into those platforms, to be able to contribute on those LinkedIn pages where people are doing it, to share articles, because it will net a lot of benefits for you. Let's open it up really quickly to our fellows. There was a lot spoken here. So anybody have any questions, comments? Yeah, we see you guys. Go ahead. She always raises her hand. She's so polite before she.
I was used to raise hand in participants, like, but sometimes it's not. So yeah, Nadine, thank you so much for this inspiring talk. Yeah, it was like really amazing. So what I'm wondering, I know that as an investor, you're always looking not only as a for the founder, but like for the entire team to see how they're working together and etc. But what if like there are, is there, okay, so my first question, what if the company has like several co-founders, but like as a CEO or as a leader, there is like for sure like one person, but are you, let's say, judging equally or not? And what is the percentage of people working together in a team? So how, let's say, much you are looking at the team, and if you like the idea, but the team cannot work together, I guess has it.
That's a great question. And we go through a lengthy due diligence process when we're looking at investing, and the management and the team structure is an important component of that due diligence process. So we look at the founder, and so understanding the founder's background, the intention, the mission, how involved is the founder in the day-to-day operations. But we also look at management, because ultimately, you know, you're not operating in a solo environment. You're not operating in a vacuum. And so as we're looking at the growth potential, how are the teams working together? What are the respective experiences of each team member? How long have they been working together as a team? And it's interesting, especially sometimes when the founders are older, what's the succession plan? You know, what's the succession next steps? You know, have you already laid that out? And when you talk about different components, who's running the different components of the business and how do they all come together? And so that's really important. And the concentration of where the customer base is within the different components, and the concentration of where the money is coming from or money is going out. So if you have 4 or 5 different components and one component is taking up 80% of the expenses, you know, that's something that we're going to evaluate. Or if one component is creating, you know, 80% of the revenues, that's something that we're going to evaluate. So really understanding the financial impact of your components, who's managing it, and better understanding the team's commitment to being a part of the organization long term. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm just wondering, as an investor, what kind of financial documents are you looking at? Like a pro forma income statement? What are some others?
Definitely the pro forma, the income statement, looking at your balance sheet, looking at your historicals, you know, depending on how far back you have, depending on how small you are, especially as a founder, we look at your personal information as well, because a lot of times founders have the bulk of their money tied into their business. And so a lot of times we've seen that homes are leveraged to help support a business. I'm not necessarily in favor of that, because I'm like, okay, you need to make sure that your home is supported, but some founders have done that. We've seen that, you know, who are some of your investors so far? You know, you can sell a part of your business and say, okay, I'm looking for investors, but 50% of my business is already allocated, or 40% to whether it's other investors or you have loans outstanding. So really trying to understand your liabilities, trying to understand, you know, where your projections and what your projections are. And we look for a projection. We look for worst scenario, the base case, and give me a scenario to say it's, you know, a better case scenario. I don't want to say best case. So we're looking at usually 25% down in estimates, your base case, and then 25% up in your revenue estimates. So that gives us a range to say, you know, if the market fluctuates about 50 basis points overall, how does that look for you and your industry? So if your revenues are down 25%, or if it's up 25%, what does that look for you? And then what's your expectation in terms of payout for investors? And again, a lot of times, you know, with private equity, we're not really looking for a payout until minimum 3 years, but usually around 5 to 7 years as we look at growing this company together with you.
I think so. Yeah, that's really. I'm really excited that you said that because you know, I've always have said to folks, like, you got to know your numbers, right? And the things that Nadine is talking about right now is like very clearly understanding what your numbers are, because they're trying to evaluate the risk and the potential associated with these opportunities. And so it starts with things such as you know, customer acquisition, right? Like when you identify who your customer is and you identify the channels that you're going to go after them with, and you start attaching a revenue number to that, it's going to be important for each of you to understand how much did it cost to acquire you a customer. And if you say, you know, it cost me $50 to get a customer, but my long-term, my LTV, lifetime value of this customer is, you know, $1,000, then that's a great scenario. And so I just want to encourage folks to like start to really understand, as you do this process, to be very conscious about your numbers. And as you find product market fit, you know, that's the place where they want to pour gasoline on. Like if you can say it cost me $50 to acquire a customer, but we earn 1,000, and here's the method and the process to do it, here's the strategy to do it, and all we need is, and if we pour gasoline on this, we 10x this or 1,000x this, we can make this much money. Like if you understand your numbers to that depth, you can go in and confidently say that. And Nadine can say, oh yeah, I see how this makes sense. They have the product, they understand the customer. I see how they've done it already. And if I add more money to this specific area, I see how it can scale and get me to where I need to get to as an investor. So I really appreciate you saying that.
And one of the questions I always ask is, walk me through how I'm going to get my return times 5. Walk me how this is going to be a sustainable company for the next 10, 15 years. Walk me through where you see the growth. So that's really important, Kyle. I agree in terms of helping the investor to understand the journey to get to the outcome that you are predicting, that you're advertising, that you're marketing. So
yeah.
You should know your numbers better than anyone else.
We got time for one more question.
I think Abdullah has a question.
Oh, Abdullah. Okay.
Hey, Nadine. So Nadine, hi, how are you? Nadine, I already have a somewhat of a good business that supports us. This project is a third project I've started in my life, and it's a family passion. I started along with my daughter and my wife. My daughter has a nonprofit of her own, and she public speaks since she was 7. So we've been at it. We just saw some void in the industry. We wanted to fill the gap as we are involved in nonprofit industry on a daily basis, hands-on. Well, you know what? That's about me. But when you're talking about investments, you said that you will, investors usually see what the return is and what is the team is. But tell us something on the opposite side, right? Isn't there horror stories where people find investors that are not good for their company? What tips can you give, right? I mean, money is green, I know, but fortunately, some of them have choice of getting which green money they want, and others, well, people like me would not know any difference. Any tips on what do we need to look for and also approach for the help?
That's a great question, because an investor-investee relationship is a relationship. It's two sides. So as much as they're evaluating you, you have to evaluate whether you want to have this person to be a part of your company's growth. And if this investor is the best type of investor for your company's growth and in line with your mission. I don't want to say unfortunately, especially in the private equity world, there's many private equity or venture capitalist investors that are just very opportunistic. They just want to go in, take as much money they can off the table, and they don't see your long-term vision. They don't see the need to keep capital in the company for as long as possible and maybe ride those highs and lows. We've seen a lot of investors try to take money out, especially this year because of COVID. And this is the worst year to take money out. You have to ride through this high, this low, to get to the next high in order for you to, again, it may take a little longer. For example, we have a portfolio of hotels that we're invested in. This is the worst year for hotels ever. When you talk about black swan for hotels and airlines, this is the year. But we're not taking our money out. We are basically ramping up. We're thinking creatively as investors in terms of how do we get people into the hotels safely? How do we make sure they're protected? Sure they feel confident coming back in. And so we've aligned with the local colleges. Again, you want investors that's going to help you to think outside of the box with regards to when things are down and when things are good, that they're not trying to leave. And so we've aligned with the local college because, again, students are going back on campus, but they need to be socially distanced and they don't have enough room in a dorm room. So some of those students are now in our hotels, which is great because we're able to get revenues. We're able to attach to a need. I would never think that students would need to be in a hotel, but we have to think outside of the box. So when you're thinking about investors, think about who's going to be value added with regards to thought leadership, who's going to be able to spend some time with you to help guide you through, those bad times or good times, and who sees the long-term value in what you're doing and not trying to just, take their money out at the first dip.
Yeah. Really, Susan, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your question before we close out. Susan, I saw your question come through, but why don't you ask Nadine that question?
I think I just wanted to find out, when do you think would be a good place for a company to start thinking about selling equity?
When you have value for an investor to invest in. So at that point, yes, when you have value, if someone wants to put money in because they see value, usually, again, for me, in my company, we're usually looking at least 2 years. But you also have to look at how much are you willing to give up? Because the earlier you are, sometimes people are looking like, well, I'm taking a big risk, so I want a little bit more equity because I'm taking a big risk because you just started, I'm going to have to invest a lot in grooming this, growing this. And so it really looks at how much are you willing to give up in order to get that equity, because a lot of times if you have a firmer structure, like Kyle said, if you know more in terms of your your customer acquisition process and where you have a business plan that makes sense and you've been able to show that you've been able to implement that on a smaller scale, as an investor, it gives me more confidence to put more money there. But you should be able to demand more because you've put in a lot more work versus, okay, I'm just starting off and I need you to help me fly. I'm going to have to invest and put in a lot more time and resources. So you have to look at how much you're willing to give up and what's the value to that investor. And again, it's not only looking at money right now. The value could be, okay, I see the opportunity to make a strong return 5 times, 10 times in 5 to 10 years. But am I willing to invest now in order to hold and be a part of this for the next 10 years? So you have to be able to show that value to the investor.
Awesome. Well, Nadine, listen, you help us at Rally prove our case that Orlando has all the capacity and the resources in the world and the knowledge and leadership in the world to be an international hub for social entrepreneurship. So we really enjoy you spending time with us today.
Thank you. And Kyle, I will make sure that you have all my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. I love this. Please
you're a new mom. So, or you're about to be a new mom. So
I am 8 months pregnant. So yes. So I am not going to be traveling anytime soon. So I will be in Orlando. I am a Zoom addict, so I stay on Zoom all day long, but I'm really, really excited. So this is my biggest project yet.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Nadine.
Thank you.